What's up, folks? Captain Blade J52 here with an update on the PTS saga going on over here in Star Wars The Old Republic. Now, I know I'm releasing this rather close to the previous video I put out on this just a couple of days ago, but there's been some significant developments in the Great Nerfening that's going to be coming down the pipes here pretty quick. But really quickly, for people that may be new to my channel or not used to me uploading content for SWTOR, I'm actually a founder over here in SWTOR that's been with the game since closed beta, and at this point I've played every class, every spec in game, some a lot more than others, but yes, I was in fact one of the dinosaurs that was here when the game first launched. But anyway, getting into the meat and potatoes of the video. Within about 12 hours of the first video I had put out there, one of the BioWare folks came onto the forums and put out an initial post noting what they felt were some of the common complaints they had noticed with everything going on, and noted we would be getting another post later on in the week. Now that dev post is here now, and I want to go over it with you guys, as well as break it down and give my thoughts on the new info from the perspective of a closed beta founder and how it relates to my earlier thoughts from the first video. So here is the first post that we got. Not really a lot to this one, but a couple of things to note. One of the complaints was that they weren't answering questions quick enough as they were arising and so on. Well, this is what they had to say about that. We know that this can be frustrating, but at this stage of the feedback process, we need your raw constructive criticism without us potentially changing or tainting it. Okay, so from the scientific perspective, this actually makes sense. They want to make sure that they're not corrupting the data that they're getting. They would rather put something out there, let folks talk about it, observe what the key complaints and questions are, then go back and answer a bunch of those down the road. So that actually makes sense. They also state that they're keeping up with every single thread that's been created. They're reviewing them as they're getting updated. They're compiling the feedback and sending that to the team, which is why they're not responding in every single thread, is to keep the info consolidated as well. So again, makes sense. That's cool if that's the case. Now, as far as their complaints that they've noted here, I would say for the most part, this is what I'm seeing as well. I don't know that I agree with all of the wording that they've chosen in some instances, but I would say it gets most of it at least. Now, as far as the gear and companion complaint, you can actually get a set of 306 gear on the PTS. It's just a massive pain in the butt to do, and you don't get to control what mods you get right now. Last time I was on the PTS, so you get what you get, which is going to skew the data a bit. Not enough to make it useless, but enough that it's something to be aware of. Anyway, getting into our actual post here. Now, I'm not going to read all of this because that would take forever and a day, but I am going to pick out certain key bits here that we're going to touch base on, and we'll go forward. Over several years and updates, more and more defensive cooldowns and abilities have been added to the game. Oftentimes, this was for class balance purposes to allow more classes to keep up with others in terms of their defensive kit. Additionally, this was done without adjusting things like Operation Boss mechanics, which were designed around the class kits available at the time, mainly less defensive cooldowns. The sheer quantity of defensive cooldowns in the game today makes things more difficult to balance for both PvE and PvP. It has made some PvE mechanics completely avoidable and made the time to kill metric in PvP grow steadily to the point where we are approaching tedious levels. In 7.0, we want to reduce the quantity of defensive skills overall across all classes, making for a more balanced and enjoyable experience in both PvE and PvP content, while at the same time making the defensives that remain more impactful and fun. What does this look like in both modes? In PvP, our intent is more balanced and dynamic player encounters that move away from rotating defensive cooldowns and move towards utilizing a broader set of skills in each class's kit. And in PvE, our intent is to take into account these changes and adjust NPC encounters as needed to compensate. And then they go on to give a specific example using the Blade Blitz ability. So, first and foremost, some of that does not go together like they think it does. You don't create a broader set of skills by taking skills away. That runs counter to your stated goals. And this is again like the pie analogy I've used before. You can slice a pie into however many pieces you want to slice that pie into, but you're not creating additional pie with each slice that you make. All you're doing is further dividing what's already there and removing more and more substance from each piece of pie as you continue to slice it up. Now there's a PvP side to this stuff and a PvE side. Now we're going to examine the PvP side of things first, and from how this reads, it sets off one of my biggest pet peeves in gaming today, and that's when PvP concerns are allowed to dictate changes to the PvE side of a game or vice versa. And I absolutely despise when games do this, as it's unfair to both PvP and PvE players alike, and serves to create an unnecessary animosity that doesn't need to be there. Even worse is that BioWare's solution makes a mountain out of an anthill and is totally unnecessary. There are much simpler and easier ways to accomplish balancing goals than re-engineering the entire balance of a game, especially when most of your players are telling you that we do not want this. We don't want this. The first thing that they need to do, which they clearly haven't done, is to separate PvP and PvE. And the way this reads right now is that they're trying to use the same code twice, but expecting different results, which is the literal definition of insanity. Now, World of Warcraft had a similar problem a few years ago where certain abilities were critical for PvE, but were considered overpowered for PvP and vice versa. So, their solution on this was twofold. For certain abilities they felt could win matches on their own, they straight up disabled their use in ranked PvP situations. An example of this is the Bloodlust or Heroism ability. I just about forgot the name there for a second. This is the Shaman ability, which gives a large amount of haste and some other benefits to your team, and the SWTOR equivalent of this would be the raid buff that Sages and Sorks actually have. Now this ability alone was able to tip PvP matches and was in fact way too strong in a PvP situation, yet was a vital part of a raid's toolkit in PvE. Disallowing its use in ranked PvP allowed both sides to get what they wanted. The PvP guys didn't have to deal with it and didn't have to see it unless they chose to go into an unranked match where everything goes, and the PvE guys got to keep a vital buff. For other abilities, they were given modifiers that affected their behavior depending on what they were being used on. If it was an NPC, it would do X. If it was a player, it would do Y. Thus, if an ability was too powerful on one side of the game or the other, but just fine for the opposite side, you could adjust the respective modifier without affecting the other side of the game at all. In fact, this type of change had to be done with a warrior ability that allowed them to keep their Sunder Armor debuff active. Now, I don't remember the name of the ability right off. Maybe somebody in the comments will say it. But it would do damage and was a vital part of their rotation there for a while as well, but was way too strong in PvP. Now the solution was a modifier that affected it differently based on if it was hitting an NPC or an actual player. Because they went back and forth for a while, they'd nerf it, and then it was too weak on this side. They buff it, but now it's too strong on this side again, and that's why they added the modifier. Now, in this instance, SWTOR needs to do the same thing, as it will allow them to adjust either side of the game without affecting the other. You can't keep doing the same thing twice and expecting a different result, as that is the literal definition of insanity. You have to separate the two if you want to have a viable balance for both sides. A thing I like to do for fun is to design mods, maps, and levels for older games, and even a couple of newer ones. Now, I've been doing this for about 15 years now, and several of my maps and levels used to be EA recommended for download in TimeSplitter's Future Perfect for weeks at a time. Now, whether it's at the small-time modder level or full-on AAA studio level, there are core questions that you must answer with this stuff that BioWare is no longer answering. And I'll touch more on these questions when we get to the PvE side of things. But getting back to making easy adjustments to game balance, there are multiple ways this can be done without a complete revamp if you think there are issues. Now, as an example of this, here's some code for a thruster mod I created for Space Engineers. In the components section, this tells me how many components of each type I need to create the thruster. Now, each component will grant a certain amount of integrity or health to the completed block. Then, down here below, there is the block pair name, which allows me to pair a large and small grid version up for easy switching between the two modes. Now, if I want to adjust the durability of the block, I can raise or lower the amount of components needed to create the block. I can raise or lower the amount of integrity each component gives, or I could do both. As one example, it takes 960 Galdax ionizers to create this particular thruster. Now, if we go into the data for the Galdax ionizer component, we can see that it grants a integrity of 20. So 20 multiplied by 960 is the amount of health points that the thruster is going to get from these components. Now, if I thought a block was too powerful for the small grid, as one example, I can restrict it from that grid. If I don't want one of the grids having access to the block, I can leave out this block pair name and it'll restrict it to whatever grid the block is sized for, which is, in the case of this block, the large grid. Now, with these lines of code, I can shape this thruster to be as weak or as powerful as I want it to be. And if I can do all of that with just these small lines of code, I have a hard time believing the devs at BioWare couldn't do something similar for SWTOR. And I would rather go into a ranked match and be told that I can't use ability X, Y, and Z because they're too strong than to have those abilities flat out removed from my toolkit. The problem in PvE with doing things the way they're proposing to do it here is that it doesn't address the core issue at the heart of all of this, which is outdated content that no longer meets today's needs and standards. That doesn't make the original content bad, and it doesn't make the new abilities bad. It means that the content needs to be updated to meet the standards of today, much how some people may update their homes. Now, World of Warcraft had a similar issue where they claimed that flying mounts were allowing people to completely ignore the intent of certain quests and quote-unquote bypass content. Now, one of their guys at the time gave the following example. Suppose you have a quest to rescue an NPC that's been captured. In the era before flight, you would approach on ground, fight your way through 20 mobs, then click on the cage and rescue the NPC. In the era of flight, you can land on the roof, click the cage, and then fly off. And he argued that examples like that justified restrictions on flying mounts, similar to how the BioWare devs are trying to blame too many defensive cooldowns for some of the issues today and arguing for their restrictions or removal. Now, there's several problems with that line of logic. First is that it comes off as blaming players for using options the devs gave them and the devs getting mad about it. Second, it ignores the fact that the largest amount of the problems were caused by players no longer having a reason to interact with those 20 mobs to start with. When you are developing content, be it at the small-time modder level like what I do, or the AAA studio level like what the BioWare or Blizzard devs do, you must answer some key questions. If you're creating a map, you have to answer the question of, why would I ever go there? Or, in the case of enemy mobs, I have to answer the question, why would I ever interact with these guys? If I, as the developer of said content, can't answer that question, how can I expect the players to do it? Now, players generally, by and large, are going to take the path of least resistance to get to their goals. Now, if I can avoid fighting unnecessary groups, that's what I'm going to do. Why am I going to fight those 20 mobs if I don't have to? The solution to the problem is to give players a new reason to interact with those 20 mobs. In this instance, instead of being able to just click the cage and fly off, put a key on one of the mobs. Then it doesn't matter whether one arrives on the ground or comes in from the air, they still have to fight the 20 mobs to get the key and unlock the cage. Thus, you've preserved the original spirit of the quest, and you've given folks a new choice of how to approach the quest. Do they fight their way in on the ground, or do they do a surprise attack from the air? That's an example of real choice being granted while preserving the existing toolkit. It forces developers and players alike to think outside of the box. And if the concern is defensive cooldowns allowing people to ignore mechanics, then the problem isn't with the defensive abilities themselves, as it's doing what it's programmed to do. The problem is the mechanic itself. Now, I'm never a fan of nerfing players to meet the mechanics, as I believe in buffing the mechanics to meet the players. Now, as one example of this, let's suppose they created a new mechanic that allowed the boss to, quote-unquote, antagonize the player similar to a tank taunting a boss. Let's assume our hypothetical player has 4 defensive abilities. Under the antagonize effect, they're considered unhinged. While the effect of the antagonize is in place, it only allows the use of 2 out of the 4 defensive abilities. Now players have to think, do I use my small defensive, or do I use the large one? Thus, you have a new boss mechanic, and it makes the choice of what ability to use and when much more impactful. And people have been asking for new mechanics and such for a while, and this is just one example. Another example. Let's assume our boss has a very nice power attack that the devs want people to get away from. If the player gets hit by said attack, it now dazes them and causes certain abilities to go on a longer cooldown if they end up getting used while the player is considered dazed. A 2-minute cooldown might now become 3 minutes, as just one example. So now they have a choice. Do they try to dodge the attack, or do they try to tank the hit and risk the extra cooldown coming back to haunt them later down the road? Neither of these mechanics have to last super long to make a large impact. And the problem right now is the reasons to interact with certain mechanics have been negated or obsoleted. We now need new reasons to use the abilities we have instead of hoarding them like a dragon guarding his treasures. This game has been my golden standard for years of what a MMO could and should be, and I would hate to think that the BioWare devs are no longer able to come up with good stuff. I would like to think they're up to this task of giving us new mechanics and so forth. Now, next is the freezing force example that got cited, which is this bit. Which is this bit. Well, it's not wanting to highlight what I want it to, but this stuff right here, essentially. So, this ability is essentially being stolen from us and baked into an upgrade for Bladestorm. Now, the upgrade to Bladestorm would make it an AoE that slows, but in a quote-unquote more efficient way. There's several things wrong with this. First up is if Bladestorm can already stun foes, why do I want my slow to proc on the enemy at the same time? If the stun lasts for 4 seconds and the slow for 5 seconds, then at best I've gotten 1 second of viable use out of my slow. That's not an upgrade, but is a straight up nerf and waste of a good slow. It also takes control of when the slow triggers completely out of my hands and ignores the purpose of what slows are supposed to do. Slows are meant to be used if a person has gotten in range in order to prevent their escape or to allow someone to close the gap between them and their opponent. Now, Bladestorm is a melee ability, and if I can't get close enough to hit my target, you've just made my new upgraded ability completely useless. So unless you're giving us a single target slow to go along with this new upgrade, you're straight up nerfing Guardians and Jugs but are too afraid to admit it. You can use fancy language all day long, but reducing the amount of abilities people have does not increase choice. Stealing abilities from us we've had largely since launch, or for years at the very least, then trying to feed bits and pieces of them back to us does not create new content, but actually steals content from us. Now, you say you want to increase choice, yet your implementation does the exact opposite of what you're trying to do. It's no different than someone thinking that slicing a pie into more pieces creates additional pie. All you're doing is reducing the size of each piece and removing the amount of substance in each piece of pie. You're not creating new content by dividing and recycling what's already there. As for this example of freezing force, I prefer to control when I use certain abilities and not the game. Otherwise, if the game is doing everything automatically for me, more often than not, it's going to waste an ability when I don't want it to. Or worse yet, it's going to prevent the ability from being available when I do need it. This is the exact reason that World of Warcraft and similar games separated their interrupts and CC breakers from other abilities. It took the control out of the hands of the player and may as well have been the game playing itself at that point. Now, games that play themselves are not fun, and I specifically play SWTOR because it hasn't been one of those games that plays itself. Now, I'll say this much, I'm glad to see that Resolute and Force Kick missing wasn't supposed to be intentional. But I still have to ask, why fix what isn't broke? Now, I also have to ask for all of this as well, based off what I'm reading here. And with all due respect, why ask for our feedback if you're going to just double down on your plans and try to convince us we're wrong? Why waste our time and yours by pretending you actually want the feedback if you're just going to double down and not actually do anything with it? That's a slap in the face to the players. And I don't know how I can drive this point home so you guys can understand it, but this current PTS is not fun for us, and the current majority of players do not want this. Stealing abilities from me is not fun for me. Recycling content and calling it new is not fun for me. Stealing abilities from me, then chopping them into smaller pieces and trying to feed them back to me is not fun for me, nor does it create new content for me. All it does is steal substance from me and pretend it's done me a favor. Now, what you guys at BioWare are doing is akin to taking my Ferrari, taking the sports engine out of it and replacing it with a rusted lawnmower engine, and then pretending you've done me a favor. You guys can try to say how it's an upgrade all day long, but it's a straight up nerf, and your players are telling you that we do not want this. Yet you seem intent on doubling down on it as though you're our parents trying to force an unruly child to take a pill that they don't want to take. Now, this comes off as not only smug, but arrogance on the part of the company, and comes across as BioWare telling its customers, you don't really like what you think you like, we know what you like, and we're going to give you what we think you want. It comes across as you guys telling people like me that have been here since closed beta and other veteran players that we're too stupid to know what we really want. I know what I like, and I know what I want when I play a game. And this new imitation of SWTOR you're trying to push will not deliver that at all, and will only chase people away from your game. You say you want to do deep dives into characters and get people to use these broader toolkits and preserve their uniqueness and all that stuff, yet you fail to realize you can't scuba dive or do a deep dive in only 6 inches of water. If you want us to have better customization and similar, there needs to be better options to customize with. Yet you're taking those abilities away, which runs counter to what you say you want to do. Now, as my final point on this, you guys complain that there's too many abilities being added, yet using the Jedi Guardian as an example, we see that we've had most of the abilities you guys are talking about that have been quote-unquote added over the years have actually been here since launch for the most part. Saber Ward, for example, has been here since launch in 1.0 and is a night ability. It's a night ability that's been here since 1.0. Annur is another ability that's been here since 1.0 and is a guardian power. Warding Call, defense guardian power, here since 1.0. Focus defense, this is the first out of the ones that have been added, was here in 1.2. Next, we have Saber Reflect, guardian power, added in 2.0. Finally, Blade Blitz, night ability, 4.0. So only 3 of those 7 abilities were actually added after the fact. All of the others have been here from the beginning. So, are you really telling me that as gradually as you guys added those abilities on, which amounts to basically 1 per expansion, for the most part, that you couldn't adjust to them having 1 additional ability? Overall, the logic is flawed, and this comes across as doubling down on the intent to nerf everyone into the ground for the sake of PvP, and simply because you guys want to. It's not about making it better for the players at all. If this was about listening to feedback from the players, you guys would be reversing course instead of doubling down, since the vast majority of your players are telling you, we do not want this and it is not fun for us. It's delivering an inferior quality of product that misses the mark, just as World of Warcraft trying this missed the mark, and Star Wars Galaxies before it missed the mark. As a closed beta founder who has been here with you guys since the beginning, it makes me angry that you guys seem intent on delivering something so subpar and below your usual standards, and robbing folks of the quality experience that myself and other veteran players have had. It makes me angry that players coming in after us will not get the experience and epicness that we did. This won't be SWTOR any longer if you guys go through with this as is, but a cheap mobile game playing itself that pretends to be Star Wars The Old Republic. You guys are doubling down even though the feedback you asked for says to do the opposite. I'm angry that a game I have played for nearly 10 years seems to no longer care about being unique, but wants to go along with flavor of the month options. This is the equivalent of taking a game like Call of Duty, known for being a fast-paced shooter, then turning it into a turn-based RPG game. Overall, you guys at BioWare need to scrap this and start over. Don't fix what isn't broke, but instead give people reasons to interact with the bits of content again that you say are the problem. Bring the content up to the level of the players. Don't nerf the players and pretend you've done us a favor. Now we're going to go back in game for just a moment because I want to drive the point home that all of these abilities have a purpose. All of these abilities have a use. Alright, we're back here in game for just a minute because I want to drive home the point that none of these abilities on these bars are useless like the BioWare devs think they are. These are not just a random collection of abilities that are on these bars. Every ability on these bars plays a vital part in the overall toolkit of my Guardian tank. If you start yanking this stuff out willy-nilly like they're really wanting to do, you're going to damage the quality of the tank overall. Over here, we have, the Warding Strike, Guardian Slash, Blade Barrage, the Saber Reflect, and then scrolling on down, you can see the other stuff that we have. That if we go over here to the right side, we have these abilities here. Every single thing on these bars is something that I chose to put there. Nobody forced me to put these abilities on my bars. So all this stuff right here that's largely fluff, all this stuff right here that is fluff, if I want to take a useless ability off my bar, this is how easy it is. If I don't want the Kolto tank on there right now, boom, gone. That's how easy it is to remove a useless power and not have to look at it while still allowing other people that have it the ability to keep using it. Now, I'm going to attack this test dummy and take a couple of times through my rotation. The first time is I just want to show you guys the basic rotation and how I'm all over these toolbars going through it. So, first up, let's go ahead and jump in. We've got some focus, Warding Strike, Guardian Slash, Blade Barrage, slap our riposte since it procced, Blade Storm. Then we're going to do a Force Sweep and do a Warding Strike, Burn a Slash, Guardian Slash, Riposte, Hilt Bash, Combat Focus, Burn a Slash, Barrage, Warding Strike. And you guys can see that I can cycle through this for a pretty good while. Now, I deliberately slowed myself down right there to demonstrate the point that unless I deliberately slow myself down, it's hard to mess this up. It's hard for you to get to a dead spot where there's nothing at all you can do. This is a well-oiled machine that could keep going for nigh infinitely. Now, I'm going to jump back in here in just a second, and I'm going to attack the test dummy again. I'm going to pretend this time that I'm in an actual situation where I would tank some mobs. I'm going to mix in a couple of abilities, such as defensives, and things that I would do if I was tanking an actual situation and trying to keep things away from Kira. So, let's go ahead, and I'm going to back up just a hair. I'm going to jump in, Warding Strike, get in here, Kira. See if I can let her fight. Alright. So, some enemies are coming. Let me throw out Awe. Let me throw out a couple of AoE attacks. Alright, got their attention. Back into it. Blade Storm. Hilt Bash. Guardian Slash. Then a Riposte. And you can see there's minimal downtime with this. Oh, we got hit. Let's throw our Saber Ward. Oh, it's still hitting the fan. Let's hit Inure on top of that. Oh, this other guy's coming. Well, let me stun him. So, you can see that it is a well-oiled machine. All of these abilities have a purpose. Now, before all of this focus goes away, I want to drive home the point about Blade Storm. Now, Bladestorm is a ability that is essentially a melee ability that sends out the wave that can stun enemies for the 4 seconds. Now, this is the ability they're proposing to upgrade and roll Freezing Force into. So, essentially, let's back up to this ability until it goes red, which is right about there. Is whenever it cuts out. So, if I can't get in range to use the Bladestorm ability, it's not going to help me. It's not going to help me. And the entire purpose of slows is to keep enemies from getting away from you that you've already closed on, or to slow them down so you can get in range. So, under this new system, unless they're giving us a single target slow to go with this, they're pretty much rendering my Bladestorm useless if I can't get close. They really are. Now, some people might say, well, that's an overreaction, and you're entitled to that opinion. Not going to fault you for that. But to even further drive this point home, is you saw me throw out the Awe ability. You saw me throw out the Inure ability. You saw me throw out several things, and if Kira actually was getting hit and I didn't have those abilities to use, she probably would have died. She probably would have died. And that goes to show that you can't just simply remove abilities and pretend like you're doing a favor to people, because you're not. And every single class is like this. There's certain abilities that, sure, you could try to upgrade them, and I'm not going to fault them for trying to find new and better systems. But the problem is that what's on the PTS is not a new and better system. This is a well-oiled machine that depends on things the way it is now. And if you start just removing components for no reason, you're going to gimp every single class in this game. And that's not preserving the uniqueness. That's not giving me a wider variety or broader variety of skills to choose from. That's straight up nerfing and theft. But anyways, I don't know how I can try to drive this home anymore at this point. I'll continue to cover this stuff for you guys that want it to be covered and want to be kept in the loop about what's going on. But get on the forums, get on the PTS, test this stuff out, give them your feedback, make clear that you do not like this, or tell them what you do like about it. But if you're like me and you see this doing far more harm than it ever can good, make that clear to these guys that you do not like it. Because this, for me, is a game ender. This, for me, would be the thing that would be the straw that broke the camel's back. And I've been here for nearly 10 years. And it makes me angry that they would deliberately put out such a subpar product and try to justify it. But anyways, folks, get on there, do the PTS testing, give them your feedback, and hopefully we can convince them to right the ship before it's too late. But for now, folks, this is Captain Blade J52, signing off.